My daughter-in-law handed me a real estate brochure with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "We found you something really lovely, Pop. Single level, very manageable." That was a Tuesday. By Thursday, she'd already called a moving company. My name is Joseph Calhoun. I'm 68 years old, retired firefighter, 31 years with the Cincinnati Fire Department. I live in the same four-bedroom colonial on Sycamore Ridge Drive that my wife Helen and I bought in 1989, the year our son was born, the year we thought everything was just beginning. Helen passed 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. After that, it was just me and the house and the garden she'd started in the backyard that I kept alive because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. My son Nathan married his wife Claire 3 years ago. She's not a bad person. I want to be clear about that. She's organized, efficient, the kind of woman who color codes her grocery list and sends calendar invites for phone calls. She'd decided, somewhere in the quiet machinery of her mind, that a 68-year-old man living alone in a four-bedroom house was a problem that needed solving. And Nathan, who had always been more comfortable letting the current take him than swimming against it, went along. What they didn't know, what Claire had never bothered to find out in 3 years of Sunday dinners at my table, was that for 22 years I had been something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with the badge or the turnout gear. I'd been a mentor, a coach, a stand-in father for young men who came through a program called Second Ladder, a nonprofit I'd helped build out of nothing in 2001 after a rookie named Darius came into our station at 19 years old. No father, no direction, just a jaw set hard against a world that had never given him much reason to trust it. Darius was the first. There were 43 after him. Claire never asked about the framed photos in my hallway. 44 faces, every one of them looking straight into the camera like they were daring it to doubt them. She walked past that wall every holiday for 3 years, never once asked a single question. That Tuesday, after she left the brochure on my kitchen counter, Meadow Creek Senior Living, Comfort and Community for Active Adults, I sat at the table for a long time. I looked at the brochure. I looked at the wall. Then I picked up my phone and called Darius. Let me back up. Claire had been working on Nathan for months before the brochure. I could see it happening the way you can see weather coming from a distance. A shift in the light, a certain stillness before the pressure drops. Nathan started bringing it up obliquely at first. "Dad, have you thought about whether this house is really practical long-term?" Then more directly, "Claire's parents are moving up from Lexington, Dad. They don't have much space in their current situation." Then, 3 weeks ago, with the bluntness of someone who's rehearsed a speech too many times, "We think it would be good for everyone if you moved somewhere with more support. Claire's parents could use the room. And frankly, this house is too big for one person. Too big for one person." I looked at my son, this man I taught to ride a bike in this driveway, who'd broken his arm falling out of the oak tree in the backyard, and cried into my shoulder all the way to the ER. And I thought about all the things I could say. About the guest room where Darius had slept for 3 months after his apartment flooded and he had nowhere else to go. About the kitchen table where I'd sat with Marcus at midnight working through his GRE prep because he was the first in his family who might go to graduate school, and he was terrified of failing. About the basement where 6 different young men had stored their belongings during transitions, job changes, moves, the ordinary chaos of building a life from scratch. I said, "Let me think about it." Nathan looked relieved. Claire smiled. That was the smile that told me she considered the matter settled. I am not, by nature, a dramatic man. 31 years in the fire service will cure you of the need for drama. You learn to stay quiet until you understand the situation. You learn that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most useful one. So I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make speeches. I just waited, and I watched. And I started making phone calls the same evening. The first call was to Darius. He picked up on the second ring the way he always does, like he's been waiting. "What's going on, Chief?" He still calls me that, has since he was 20 years old. I told him the situation plainly. Nathan, Claire, the brochure. The timeline Claire had apparently already set in motion in her head. There was a silence. Then, "Give me 48 hours. Darius, you don't need to." "Chief." His voice had that tone he gets, the one that sounds like the closing of a heavy door. 48 hours. I called Marcus next. He's a litigation attorney in Chicago now, 39 years old. Grew up in Avondale with his grandmother after his mother left. He came into second ladder at 17, angry as a lit fuse. And inside of 2 years, he turned that anger into something pointed and purposeful. He listened to me the way he listens to everything, very still, very focused. Does Nathan know about second ladder, what it actually is? He knows I mentored some kids from the fire service program. Does he know what 44 of those kids look like today? He's never asked. Another silence. "Okay," Marcus said. "I'll make some calls. I want to be honest about something. Part of me didn't want this. Part of me thought, he's my son. This is between family. I should handle it quietly, the way you handle everything that matters." But then I thought about Claire's smile when she'd handed me that brochure. Not unkind exactly, just conclusive. The smile of someone who has already decided and is now managing the announcement. And I thought about the people in those photographs on my wall, and what I'd told every single one of them when they came to me with a problem they thought was too big for them. You don't have to fight alone. That's not weakness. That's just knowing your people. So I let Darius and Marcus make their calls. What happened over the next 72 hours, I only learned about after the fact. Darius, who is now the deputy fire chief of a department in Columbus, called 6 men from the early years of the program. Marcus reached out to another dozen through a group thread they apparently maintained that I didn't know existed. Someone, I still don't know who, sent a message to the broader Second Ladder network, and by Friday morning my phone was lit up with texts from people I hadn't spoken to in years. All of them said some version of the same thing: "We're coming." I told Darius it was too much. I told Marcus they didn't need to upend their lives over a family disagreement. Marcus said, with the particular patience of a man who has spent 17 years arguing cases in front of skeptical judges, "Chief, you stood in a courtroom gallery for my bar admission ceremony when my own father didn't show up. Please don't tell me this is too much." I didn't say anything after that. Claire had scheduled a formal family meeting for Saturday morning. Her words, "a family meeting." She'd made a brunch reservation afterward, which told me everything about how she expected the conversation to end. Nathan called Friday evening to make sure I was doing okay, which was his way of making sure I hadn't changed my mind. I told him I was fine. I told him I'd see him Saturday. What I didn't mention was the 3 cars already parked outside. Darius had arrived Friday afternoon in a truck that still had the Columbus Fire Department sticker on the back windshield. 2 others had shown up within the hour. By Friday evening, there were 9 people in my house, most of them men in their 30s and 40s, who'd grown up without fathers and found one anyway, eating Helen's chili recipe out of the pot on the stove and filling up every room with a noise that hadn't been in this house in a long time. I sat at the kitchen table watching them and felt something move in my chest that I didn't quite have a name for. Darius sat across from me. "You ready for tomorrow, Chief?" "I don't even know what tomorrow looks like." He smiled. "It's going to look like the truth." Saturday morning, I woke up at 6. The smell of coffee was already in the house. 4 of the men had stayed overnight, sleeping on the couch, the guest room floor, wherever they could fit. By 8 o'clock, the street in front of my house was lined with cars. Not luxury cars, not the kind of fleet that announces wealth, just the real, specific accumulation of 44 working lives. A Columbus Fire Department truck. A car with the Chicago Bar Association parking pass on the dash. A rental from the airport, still with the sticker on the bumper. A minivan with 2 car seats in the back, belonging to a man who'd once told me he'd never have kids because he didn't know how to be a father. He has 3. By 9 o'clock, 31 people stood in my front yard and on my porch, not in a formation, just present. The way people stand when they belong somewhere. Nathan and Claire pulled up at 9:15. Claire was in the passenger seat holding the folder she'd prepared, which I knew contained printed information about Meadow Creek Senior Living and, almost certainly, some kind of preliminary paperwork she'd been hoping to walk me through over brunch. I watched through the window as Nathan put the car in park. I watched Claire look at my front yard. I watched her expression shift through something I recognized. The look of a plan encountering reality. They walked up the front path. The men on the porch and in the yard didn't move. They just watched, quiet and still, in the way that people who've learned to hold ground actually hold it. Darius stepped forward when Nathan and Claire reached the porch steps. Morning. I'm Darius Coleman, Deputy Fire Chief, Columbus. Joseph Calhoun's been my mentor since I was 19 years old. He shook Nathan's hand with the particular firmness of someone who means it. You must be Nathan. Nathan looked slightly dazed. Yeah, what is all this? Family meeting, Darius said simply. Claire looked at the folder in her hands. Then she looked at the 31 people who'd come from 7 different states to stand in my front yard on a Saturday morning. I saw her do the mental recalculation that her spreadsheet hadn't accounted for. Marcus came around from the side of the porch. He had his attorney bearing on, the easy, unhurried confidence of a man who knows exactly what he knows. Marcus Webb. I drove down from Chicago last night. Joe helped me get into law school when I was 23 years old and convinced I wasn't smart enough to be in any room I was already in. He glanced at Claire's folder. I understand you've been exploring some options regarding this property. I've looked at the relevant Ohio statutes, if that's helpful. Claire said quietly, we weren't trying to. This was meant to be a family conversation. It is, said a voice from the side of the yard. That was Kevin, who runs a residential construction company in Dayton and had worked on my roof 2 summers ago as a favor he'd insisted on giving. We're his family. I came out the front door then and walked down the porch steps. The people on either side shifted slightly to make a path, and I came through and stood in front of my son. Nathan looked at me. His face had gone through something in the last 5 minutes. The performance of the thing was over, and what was left was younger, less certain, more like the boy I knew. Dad, he said, I didn't. I know, I said. You didn't know what you were asking me to give up. Let me show you. I turned to the yard, to the 31 people who'd rearranged their weekends and their lives to stand on this patch of Ohio ground with me. That's Darius. He came to me at 19 with nothing and figured out he wanted to lead people. He's been deputy chief for 4 years. I named them one by one. Not their credentials, not their titles. I named what I knew about them. The night Marcus called me from a payphone outside a courthouse because he'd gotten into his first-choice law school and had no one else to call. The day Kevin showed up at my door with 2 broken ribs and a story he needed to tell someone who wouldn't panic. The summer 3 of them lived in this house simultaneously, ate at this table, fought over the television, and left with something they could build a life on. 31 stories, 31 real, specific, true things. Nathan stood very still through all of it. Claire had stopped holding the folder in front of her like a shield. At some point she'd let it drop to her side. When I finished, I looked at my son. This house is not too big for one person, I said. It's exactly the right size for what it does. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'm sorry, Dad. I don't think I understood what this place actually was. Claire looked at the folder she was holding. Something in her face had changed. Not defeated, exactly, but recalibrated. My parents are going to stay in Lexington for now, she said. We'll figure something else out. It wasn't a grand moment. Nobody cheered. Nobody made a speech. It was just a Saturday morning in Cincinnati. 31 people standing in a yard. A son looking at his father like he was seeing him for the first time. The rest of the day was something I didn't plan and couldn't have designed. People stayed. Kevin fired up my grill. Someone made a grocery run. The kids who'd ridden up in the minivan chased each other around the backyard in the same loop I used to watch Nathan run when he was small enough to get dizzy from it. Darius sat with Nathan on the porch for almost an hour. I don't know everything they talked about. Nathan told me later that Darius had said he never bragged about any of you. Not once. He just kept the pictures up and answered the phone. I thought about that for a long time afterward. 3 days later, Claire called me. Not Nathan, Claire. She asked if she could come by to talk, just the two of us. She sat at my kitchen table and I made coffee, and she looked at the wall of photographs for probably the first time she'd actually looked at it. Not walking past, looking. How many of them grew up without a father? She asked. Most of them, I said. That's not why I did it. I did it because there was a kid in my station who needed someone, and I was standing there. But it became this. It became this, I agreed. She was quiet a moment. I was trying to solve a problem, she said. I'm good at solving problems. I didn't ask what the actual situation was. That's an honest thing to say. I'm trying to be honest. She looked up at me. I think I've been making decisions for Nathan for a long time without really. I'm not sure I've been paying attention the right way. I wasn't going to tell her what to do with that, but I respected the fact that she was sitting there saying it. You're not a bad person, Claire, I said. You didn't have all the information. I didn't try to get it, she said. There's a difference. She was right about that, and the fact that she knew it, that gave me more hope for them than anything else. Nathan and I had dinner alone the following week. He sat at the same table where he'd done his homework, fought with me about curfews, told me the night after Helen's diagnosis that he was scared and he didn't know how to act normal. He ate the pot roast I'd made, the same one his mother used to make, and eventually he said what had been building in him all week. I knew about the mentoring, Dad. I just didn't want to know how much it mattered. That sounds awful. It sounds human, I said. I was thinking about Claire's parents and the practical side of things, and I didn't ask what I was actually asking you to give up. No, I said. You didn't. He accepted that. Didn't argue it away. Didn't defend it into nothing. He just accepted it. That took more than I expected from him, and I told him so. Mom would have set me straight in about 10 minutes, he said. She would have done it in 5 and made you think it was your own idea. He laughed at that. First real laugh I'd heard from him in weeks. We sat there a while longer, at the table where so much of our life had happened, and something between us that had been pulled tight started to ease. 6 months later, Nathan asked me if Second Ladder ever took volunteers. He meant it seriously. I told him to come by on a Thursday evening and see how it ran. He came. He's been back every Thursday since. I still live on Sycamore Ridge Drive, the colonial with the 4 bedrooms and the backyard garden, and the wall of 44 photographs, which now has a 45th. A young man named Isaac who came to us last fall, 17 years old, quiet in the way that people are quiet when they've learned that speaking up costs too much. He reminds me of Darius at 19. That same jaw, that same careful way of sizing up a room. He's eating dinner here on Sundays now. He started to talk. The house is exactly the right size. If you're watching this, tell me, what does family mean to you? Not the word, the real thing. Leave it in the comments. I read every one. I still think about the folder Claire was holding when she walked up my front path that Saturday morning. She'd printed everything out, color-coded the tabs, probably rehearsed how the conversation would go. That's who she is. A person who solves problems efficiently, and in her mind, I was a problem, a 68-year-old man rattling around in a 4-bedroom house when her parents needed the space, clean, practical, decided. What she hadn't done was ask. That's the thing I keep coming back to, not her intention. I genuinely don't think she meant harm. But intention without attention does damage anyway. She had looked at the surface of my life for 3 years and decided she understood it. The Honda in the driveway. The modest house. The retired firefighter who gardened on weekends. She'd built a complete picture out of what was visible and never once wondered what was underneath. Darius wondered. He always has. When he was 19 and I was just some captain at the station who kept showing up with a sandwich and an opinion about his future, he would sit across from me and ask questions that most people his age didn't think to ask. Not about what things looked like, about what they were, that habit of mind. That refusal to accept the surface as the whole story is part of what made him into the man who showed up at my house on a Friday afternoon without being asked twice. Marcus built his whole career on the same instinct. He told me once that the worst thing a lawyer can do is walk into a room already certain. You miss the thing that changes everything. I think about that a lot. What I've learned from 31 years in the fire service and 22 years of sitting across kitchen tables from young men who had every reason not to trust the world is that character is not one thing, it's three things working together, and when one is missing, the whole structure is weak. There's the part that knows right from wrong and acts on it even when it costs something. Nathan had that. He always had it. But somewhere along the way, he'd let comfort talk him out of using it. He knew what he was asking me to give up wasn't right. He just didn't want to be the one who said so. There's the part that thinks clearly, that gathers the actual facts before drawing conclusions, that asks the question instead of assuming the answer. That's what Claire was missing, not malice, but the discipline to be curious before being certain. She learned something that Saturday. I watched it happen in her face. And then there's the part that holds. The part that doesn't fold when things are inconvenient or uncomfortable or hard to explain to other people. Darius has had that since he was 19. He drove 2 hours because I called him. Not because I asked for help. I specifically said he didn't need to come. He came anyway because that's what you do when someone has spent 20 years showing up for you. You don't calculate. You just go. Isaac is 17 now and sitting at my Sunday table. He doesn't say much yet, but he's watching everything. How people treat each other when it matters. Whether the adults in the room mean what they say. Whether trust is a thing that gets honored or a thing that gets traded away when it becomes inconvenient. I think about what he's learning. I think about what I want him to carry out of this house when he goes. The same thing I try to give all of them. Not a lesson. A pattern. A way of being in the world that holds up under pressure. The house is still exactly the right size.